Sadnam, we are Jen and Ramtin from Heart Center Revolution.
Our intention with this podcast is to share the best of Kundalini Yoga and conscious living with you so you can live a more heart-centered life. Satnam, and welcome to the 41st episode of the Heart Centered Revolution podcast. On this podcast, we're doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be interviewing one of the fellow teachers here in Los Angeles. She just has a really interesting story about how she came into Kundalini Yoga, and she is one of the experts or specialists in celestial communication, which is a really beautiful and, in my opinion, under-practiced part of Kundalini Yoga. And I think people are just a little intimidated or scared by it. So I'm hoping this conversation with Adarsh will alleviate some of those anxieties. And then, as always, at the end of the podcast, I'll lead you through a brief pranayam. And for this episode, we're just going to take it back to basics and do some long, deep breathing. So before we get into the interview, I want to share a little bit about Adarsh and how we met her. Adarsh came and taught us a segment on celestial communication during our teacher training when Ramtin and I were in teacher training. And it was just such a fun and beautiful experience. And Adarsh has such a grace and presence about her. And since that time in 2013, I've taken a few of her classes and seen her around one of the major yoga studios in Los Angeles because she helped run their teacher training programs, I believe. And just, I always felt a connection to her and appreciated her authenticity and vulnerability. I think as teachers, it's easy to take the expert stance, almost like out of insecurity. It's easy to present yourself as an expert and like you're perfect and like you know everything. And there's absolutely room for those teachers because that really resonates with a lot of people. And a lot of people feel comfort in that. But I appreciate teachers and aim to be a teacher who are a little bit more vulnerable and kind of keep it real about how the implementation of these practices in a human life goes. So I think that's where Adarsh and Ramtin and myself kind of overlap, is this desire to be honest and authentic about our own stories and paths and kind of using those experiences to help foster our teaching. There are just a couple things I want to touch on before we get into the interview. One is that Adarsh mentions the 7-year consciousness cycle. And now this is referring to one of the 3 life cycles, the consciousness life cycle that we talked about in the last episode. And you don't really need to know much about it other than that in Kundalini Yoga, there's this idea of cycles. And one of them is this consciousness life cycle. So that every 7 years, like how you see the world and what your priorities are can shift. So it's like you gain experience over 7 years. And then as that cycle of 7 years comes to a close, you come to like an integration or maturity point. And so when she refers to the 7-year consciousness cycle, that's what she's talking about. And if you want to learn more, you can listen to episode 40. Adarsh also makes reference to Española, which is an ashram or a community in New Mexico that Yogi Bhajan lived at for, at least a couple decades, I think. And it was a community of Kundalini Yoga teachers and practitioners. And they lived in community, had businesses, kind of practiced together. And Adarsh lived there for a while, learning directly from Yogi Bhajan and then from the community of teachers and practitioners that were there. I'd also like to add a disclaimer, and Adarsh and I had a conversation about this that wasn't recorded, that as we're talking about Yogi Bhajan, and he was, the guru or the yogi who was the Kundalini Yoga master and brought it to the U.S. But in the past couple of years, some allegations have come forward that are substantiated, accusations of some pretty serious abuse of power. And so I just want to be very clear that when we talk about Yogi Bhajan, it's hard to talk about Kundalini Yoga without bringing his name up because all of these teachings came through him. And I do honor his expertise in these yoga teachings, but I don't want to ever imply that we're putting him on a pedestal or that we think he's perfect, or that we discredit or dismiss the experiences that some of these victims had. And in fact, in a conversation that wasn't recorded, Adarsh and I kind of talked about how, especially those practitioners who practice with Yogi Bhajan directly, have had to go through this almost like the grieving process, the stages of grief, and come to a terms of acceptance that this man who, for many of them, wasn't predatory or didn't do anything inappropriate, who was kind of their yoga teacher and spiritual guide for so many years and such an important person of their life, also engaged in these behaviors that other people are reporting. All right. And my last disclaimer for this conversation is that while Adarsh and I kind of talk about religion related to Kundalini Yoga and how the two can intermix, I always like to clarify that Kundalini Yoga is not a religion and you are not required to believe anything in order to practice. Kundalini Yoga is, in fact, a set of practices, things that you do, meditations, and things like that. And what you believe is completely up to you. Now, within the Kundalini Yoga teachings, they do offer teachings about spirituality and what it means to be a spiritual being in this human experience. But believing those things is not required at all to be a Kundalini Yoga practitioner or a Kundalini Yoga teacher. Okay, I think we're ready now. I would love to introduce you to our fellow Kundalini Yoga teacher, Adarsh. So welcome to the Heart-Centered Revolution podcast, Adarsh. I'm so excited to have you here and grateful that you spend the time to share your story and your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jen. I feel this real respect for who you are and what you do, and like a real mutual, authentic connection. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today and dive into Kundalini Yoga and whatever else comes to be.
And I am really excited to share you with our audience because we want to just kind of grow the community and kind of interconnect everybody in this. Like the Kundalini Yoga community is so amazing. And so to connect as many people as possible. I would love to start off just kind of with your Kundalini Yoga journey, and then we can talk about your specialty, which is celestial communication. So do you mind starting just telling us kind of how you stumbled into Kundalini Yoga or how it came into your life and what drew you to it?
When I was 14 is when I was introduced first to yoga, and not to Kundalini Yoga yet, but that definitely got me started. I was a dancer, a serious student of dance, and part of my modern dance training was studying yoga and meditation. But it was only when I was in class. I wasn't a serious practitioner. But that was also the time, that age of 14, 15, 16, that I really was on my spiritual journey. I studied like every kind of spiritual practice I could get my hands on and had every experience I could. I traveled to the Middle East. Like I started really moving far beyond what was in my family and community circles, and really I was a seeker. And so then I made it to college and I was just on this path. I studied a lot about spirituality in school and anthropological and historical contexts and modern contexts. And I had over all these years so many big experiences, like euphoric experiences, both through spirituality and also through artistic kind of experiences. I was a performer and was really into the arts. So I would have these high experiences, and usually with groups of people too. I had some on my own, but a lot in community, even with some nature experiences, service experiences. And I really started to struggle. I was 20 years old, and I was really starting to struggle with having these high experiences and feeling this depth of my soul, and also what was possible in terms of consciousness with people and what we could create, but then going back to an everyday life. And I felt this very huge disconnect, actually to the point of depression. I had come off of a summer of like incredible experiences, and then it just did not make sense to me to return to school in the fall, going to class. And I was like, what is the purpose of this? And what is the purpose of my life? And so I spent that semester really struggling, getting depressed, trying some things out, but not really knowing what to do or where to go. And I talked with a lot of people, but I talked with my two academic advisors in school. who were professors. I was in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas. And they were both practicing Kundalini yoga. And they both
Really?
recommended it to me. And this is, I
Like
just
separately, I assume.
separately. They did not know each other. One was in the anthropology department, one was in the English department. And
Wow.
just to give context, this is 1998 in Austin, Texas. There weren't a lot of people doing Kundalini yoga. There was a Kundalini yoga based studio that did multiple kinds of yoga, but definitely with a strong Kundalini base. But this was a small place. This was not like what it is now in Austin or where I live in LA. This was like, now I really think this was incredible. But at the time it all seemed normal because this was the world I was in. I was trying things out and meeting lots of spiritual people and spiritual teachers. I had been doing that for years at this point. So of course I said, yes, let me try it out. So I ended up starting in January 1999, and I went to a few classes, and just after the second class, I knew like this, this is something special. What I felt was that I was able to, in a class, get to this depth of my soul, like in an hour and 15 minutes. So I didn't need to go like on this huge trip to another country. I didn't need to spend like weeks in rehearsals and then these like, sleepless nights and anxiety and performances that then got me to that state, or, all the things I was doing to have this experience of my soul and expression of my soul. But that could be really very simple and quick and effective by doing these breath and movement and music practices. And that's what I really liked too. I really liked how much movement and music there was because I was a dancer and this made sense to me. And breath work was actually pretty new to me. Well, in this form, like beyond long, deep breathing. And meditation was very new and very difficult. I had a very difficult time sitting still to start, but it woke something up in me and it released things in me. The second class I took, I remember it. It was the Kriya to Relieve Inner Anger. And it was so powerful. And would never have known I had this inner anger. I wouldn't have known I had all this like locked up inside of me. And I felt freed. I felt so free. And of course I found a community there too, the community and all the people I met. And these practices again were just so effective. And it really, I had decided already to take that whole semester off of school, that spring semester, because I was that just having that much of a struggle. And supported, my advisor supported, everything was supported, but I worked, which was very grounding. I just did a lot of grounding things like with the earth as well. And I took Kundalini yoga classes. And in really a matter of 3 months, I was able to bridge this gap that I had been feeling for so long between the expansion of my soul and how I was living every day. And it just got closer and closer together until I felt that it was all one.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that feeling of like, I felt the same after like one Kundalini, not the same, but after one Kundalini yoga class, I was like, oh, like this feeling I'm familiar with of like alignment or divine connection, but now I have a way to do it on purpose, intentionally. And I don't need anyone. Well, at that time I needed a teacher, but as time went on, like I just didn't need anyone there to do it. It was my own discipline and my own practice that could get me there. And I didn't need the creative expression or to drive out and take a 4-mile hike to get a break. It's so empowering to be able to tap into that sweet connection or spot so easily. It's really it's crazy how powerful it is when you do it.
I
But
really just resonate with what you said about how empowering it is, and also how that it's on purpose. Yeah, that I could choose every day to connect with my soul and not feel like I'm at the whim of something or someone else. And
yeah. And even better, like when you feel disconnected, especially having gone through teacher training and stuff, you're like, oh, I know how to get back into connection. Like there's something to do. I had two, if you don't mind, like follow-up things that stuck out as you were telling your story. I just think it's so amazing that particularly it sounds like it was in the 80s or 90s, like when you were 14, you were on a spiritual path. Like, what do you think at such a young age sparked like you to start this path at what seems to me a young age?
I was a big questioner from when I was very young. You know, my parents will say this now. Like, I would ask these questions, like, you know, at age like 5, like, how will I know if I'll be a good person when I grow up?
Mm.
Or, you know, I was really trying to understand God, and I would ask all these questions that, you know, my parents really couldn't answer. My Sunday school teachers couldn't answer. You know, I had kind of scary questions for adults, which were just how I thought. So I really think it was just in a way how I was born. And then I feel that, and I grew up in a church, you know, and I had this amazing also youth pastor from when I was
Mm-hmm.
14 who really got us to listen to our own inner voice of our soul.
Wow.
And it really wasn't dogmatic. I mean, some things in the community, I would say, were probably still, you know, naturally not overly dogmatic, but, you know, there was a
Mm-hmm.
dogma. But in our teenage group, we were allowed to question, we were allowed to express ourselves and find our own relationship with God. And then similarly, when I was taking these modern dance classes, which is also unusual in San Antonio, Texas in 1992, but there was this woman, Kay Braden, who would drive from Austin, you know, which was a little more progressive, and come teach us once a week. And she taught us, you know, Martha Graham technique and all of these early modern dance, like from these styles and techniques. And what's important about that is that they're very spiritually based, and they're
Mm.
very Eastern spirituality influenced. And so I think even just with modern dance, I was getting that. And even with my Russian ballet teacher, I was getting this connection with the breath and movement. So I do think there were a few adults that were definitely opening the doorways for this,
Mm.
for the experiences and the questioning. And then I definitely sought out experiences. Then as I was moving into more 15 and 16, you know, my trip to the Middle East, like I got a scholarship to do with other teenagers, but it was to study the cultures and religions and to live with different groups every week. And I mean, I think I really had to seek that pretty, like
Yeah.
I was like, people are still asking like, how did you do that at that age? But I was really clear. And then I, of course, because I was going there, I wanted to study biblical Hebrew before I went there. So I found a group doing that in San Antonio. And I just was always kind of seeking. And I would say that my parents also supported it a lot,
Mm-hmm.
that seeking. And I read a lot of books. I mean, I was reading, and even before 14, I mean, maybe I was 13, 14, I was in middle school waiting for the bus stop reading Shirley MacLaine's books, who I knew from dance, but she was, you know, she wrote all these spiritual books about how your mind can change your experience and how you feel. I can't remember all the names of them, like Dancing in the Light and a bunch of those. So I read all those in middle school.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So a lot of, yeah, support, I think.
Do you or did you have any trouble, or like how was the combining or blending of the Kundalini yoga teachings with the faith that you grew up with? Because I know a lot of people in my classes who are Christian kind of have a lot of questions about how to integrate. And me not being Christian, and honestly not the best person to answer those questions because I try my best, but I just don't have the experience. Do you mind sharing like what that was like for you to blend those two?
Sure, that's such a good question. And it comes up a lot for me too that people ask. So I have a few things to say about it. I think I was already so multicultural, I would say multi-religious in a way before Kundalini yoga, in
Mhm.
that I was definitely exploring, and it was never a contradiction for me. You know, I studying all the religions and practices that I had access to even as a teenager. I was really seeking from that age too, like what's the same in everything? Because then I felt like that was going to be the truth. I think I was very involved in my church, but I also, because I was such a questioner, I didn't agree with kind of with everything or the way it was presented, but not in a adversarial way. I just knew it wasn't the full reality for me. The way it was presented. I don't mean like a true Christian path, but I mean just the way that I was hearing about it and the experiences that were being offered to me at the time. And I grew up in a really lovely Lutheran church.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to college at 18, I studied anthropology and focused on religion and spirituality. So I was just really
Yeah.
focused on that. And before Kundalini yoga, and it was interesting because I felt kind of like I was nothing and everything at the same time. And when I started Kundalini yoga, so it just wasn't even in my mind to question or to how to look at that. But later in life, more recently, I have more reintegrated more strongly, I would say, and looked at that. And so more recently, I've seen actually how, like, now I see the similarities really clearly. I could probably write a paper on this actually, about how the Christian path and the Kundalini path, how they intersect and support each other,
Mm.
which was probably not my focus when I began, because I wasn't, just thinking that way. I was just in a different moment in life. But I spent a lot more time in the Christian path in these last years, and connecting with a beautiful Episcopalian church I connected with, and the priests there. And we talked a lot about it, like collegially too,
Mm-hmm.
like how these are like so the same. And if anyone is on the Christian path, one thing I found really interesting, because I know I could talk about this forever, but just to bring it into one interesting connection for me, was that the way that Jesus talks about the disciples and the path of the disciples is so similar to how it's described how to be a Kundalini yoga teacher.
Mm.
The level of self-initiation and spiritual maturity, and using your gifts, and really walking in the path of, whether you want to call it God or the one or your source. When I hear the passages in the Bible and I read the words for being a Kundalini yoga teacher, they are to me the same. And there's many other things like that, but that one for
Yeah.
me was very striking to really just hear the first time a few years ago, to hear that
Yeah.
similarity.
I would really encourage you to explore that. I mean, when you feel called to, like, even to write a paper or a blog post or something, because I think it would help. I know a lot of students who are Christian and they love the feeling of being in Kundalini yoga, but then have a lot of fears that they're doing something that their faith would say was wrong. And there's like some guilt there, or like trepidation. And I do my best to try to help them through that. But I just think it would be such a beautiful gift to help people bridge, who feel called to. Of course, Kundalini is self-initiation, but for people who feel called to help them have answers to how to reconcile some of those things.
Well, I'll do that. I will take up that challenge. Actually, I think that's beautiful. And one thing I'll just follow up personally too, that I found with it, is that to me, the Christian path is so much devotion, and so many religious paths are. There's such a beautiful practice of devotion and reverence. And for me, the piece that Kundalini yoga brings to that, that is so complementary, is more what we would call in Kundalini yoga the Shakti, but like the empowerment, or the um, even like the stability and consistency to be able to live in that devotion. It like gives me the spiritual tools to actually live what this truth is that's being spoken,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's on the Christian path or another path. Like, these are high ideals and high truths to actually live. So I feel, yeah, Kundalini yoga gives me the energy, the vitality. So it's not just speaking of compassion and knowing that's a good thing, but how can I actually truly live with compassion? Or how can
Yeah.
I actually forgive? And having some of these tools that give um, the release of stress, the release of burdens, that can, which also can happen through grace and through the
Mm-hmm.
devotion, for sure. But for me, the combination is what I feel allows me to live in truth and not just aspire to it.
That's so beautifully said. And I've heard that from some students that have kind of broken through that initial beginner phase, who have said that the whatever their religion is, that Kundalini yoga really supports the practicing of their religion, and kind of the increased sensitivity and stability and awareness kind of supports whatever their original belief system is or faith is.
Amazing.
So it sounds like you got connected with Kundalini yoga when you were in college in Austin, just to circle back to your story.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, like between then, like what happened to make you decide to then leap into being a teacher and doing teacher training, which is a huge milestone and commitment, as anyone who's done it or considered it knows.
Yes, I moved pretty quickly. It started in January and was in teacher training by September.
Wow.
I went to classes every week. I went to a white tantric yoga course a few months in, and then to summer solstice in June, and started teacher training in September. For me, it felt so strong for me, and I just wanted to learn everything I could. I was also in that learning time of college, and I just kind of wrapped it into that. Like it was this other school I was going to, is how it felt, that supported me in my other school I was doing. Like, that it again gave me that kind of vitality and structure and discipline, and community and joy. So, but one thing I think, a bigger question, because I really like this question on like, how did I become a teacher, or what made me decide that it was a very natural flow for me to do teacher training, but it wasn't that I was so focused on becoming a teacher, as that's true for many people.
Yeah.
And so I did it to learn and to have the experience. And then I moved into the ashram for a few months afterwards to really have also an experience of living, like doing the Aquarian sadhana every day, living with teachers. Like that was even another level for
Yeah.
me. And then I moved to Espanola, New Mexico, um, because I was invited to move there and given a job. And so my flow went pretty quickly then into living in the biggest ashram community, was known as the Mother Ashram, and it's where Yogi Bhajan lived at the time, and I went there. So for me, becoming a teacher, I was subbing classes right away after, and I loved it. I loved teaching. Um, but it was just like a part of many things I was doing, a part of me. And then when I moved to Espanola, it wasn't so much focused on being a teacher in the yoga class sense. Some people really dedicated themselves to it, but if you could imagine moving to a very sparsely populated place where there are many, many, many Kundalini teachers,
Yeah.
and my focus really became learning business and becoming a businesswoman, and continuing to learn and study with Yogi Bhajan, with all the other teachers there, with the healers there, and studying kirtan and mantra, studying Bhangra dance. And I studied everything. And what I felt I was more focused on was the teacher and the consciousness of a teacher. Like, how can I show up as a teacher wherever I am, not in teaching classes? The main thing that I did during that time, during that 8 years that I lived there, was community programs. So leading community chantings, and with music, playing music, singing, celestial communication, teaching children yoga. This is really what I did. And it was completely like a hobby. Like I had a full-time career. And most people lived this way there also. And then when I moved to Los Angeles 12 years ago, right after I lived in Espanola, New Mexico, then that's really when I had like more of the space and the opportunity, I'd say, to teach regular classes, and really got excited about it. And I really wanted to as well. I'd been practicing all these years, and so then I started teaching regularly in Los Angeles, and I really just wanted to do it also because I had benefited so much from the practice, and I wanted to share it. It almost felt like many people have said this to me, like, wow, I know this works for me and this has helped me so much, and it's almost a disservice, if I don't share it now, if I don't, and it gave me so much joy to share it. But it was very much a hobby. I still had a whole other full-time career. And then I ended up working at Yoga West and helping to run the business of Yoga West, and getting to teach more and more, getting involved in teaching and the teacher trainings. And I just feel, for me, it's actually been very gradual. Part of why I'm saying this is I feel like every however many years, I've moved more into being a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never all at once. And I think becoming a trainer and teacher training, I felt this much more responsibility and much more seriousness with it. And anyway, over years, just kept developing. And then even more recently, actually leaving Yoga West and going out to teach more in the world is when I felt like, in a way, that I really fully self-initiated as a teacher. Even though it's so many years in, because before I felt like I was in the nest.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. And I feel like that's a great way to begin as a teacher. I had a lot of support from my teachers around me and from my peers. And I wasn't really, I was growing. I got challenged a lot as a teacher. So I don't want to say I wasn't a teacher, but I felt this like kind of, I guess, culmination or graduation to go and teach where, no one else is holding the space. And it's really like, there's a different feeling to me now where like I am creating the space. Along with the infinite and the golden chain, but there's nobody else kind of making sure I'm teaching correctly or making sure everything's okay for me. I didn't even know that was there before, but now I can tell when it's not there. And I love it. And I feel, these last few years now, I felt like I don't know what the right word is, fully surrendered to being a teacher, like all in.
Yeah. That makes sense given like your story. And you were like, if you were in Espanola, or I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but you had like you lived in this community of teachers. Like that is what a protective environment to be in, though I imagine everyone challenges each other to grow. Um, but that makes sense. And then stepping into Yoga West and then kind of stepping out more on your own, what a beautiful and gentle transition, as you're saying.
Yeah. So I also like to share that because, if someone's newly a teacher, to know that it can be, some people it's very quick and they're very clear, and that is amazing. And it's equally amazing to take your time or to let it develop, in everyone's unique way.
Yeah. Well, and I think most people, at least in my teacher training, and I know Ramtin and myself, neither of us intended to teach at all. And now it's like what I want to do full time. And so it's very common to go into it without that intention to be a teacher. So on your journey, how did you come across celestial communication, and kind of how did that become such a big part of your practice and your teaching?
Yes. So also going back to this age of 14. So this is pre-Kundalini yoga, but I think a lot was happening for me at 14. Really, it was. I think, it's also this consciousness cycle, 7,
Mhm.
14, 21, and so on. I was teaching music to the children in my church, songs about God or about the spirit, songs about love. And as I think many people do teaching children, I don't think this is unique. But we'd make up our movements to songs with the
Mhm.
kids. And some we knew, and I would make up new ones. Maybe I was really into it. I would make up all of our movements. I was a dancer and a choreographer, so I had this really, really strong movement background. Very strong, to begin with. And then, we would do this with kids, and it was so fun. And we'd have the kids, stand in front of the whole congregation and lead it. And it was such a beautiful experience. So I'd had that experience up until maybe 15, and then I wasn't doing it anymore. And then when I was 21, practicing Kundalini yoga, went to my first summer solstice, and I saw people doing basically the same thing,
Uh-huh.
but with adults and with like 1,000 people doing it together. And when I saw it, I was just, I was, gosh, my heart and spirit just were like blown away. And I loved it. I did it with them, and it was so joyful. And it was really this feeling of this huge expansion on this
Mhm.
thing I had already created and experienced, that I knew really, but it was bigger
Mm-hmm.
feeling. Like it had a sophistication to it and also a power to it that I hadn't experienced. And I'm sure there was like amazing live, loud music with it. And
Well, and you do anything and synchronize with 1,000 people, and there's a power to it.
yes,
And not to
exactly.
diminish celestial communication, but like what an initiation into that practice.
It truly, yes. So I saw it, and I don't even know that I got any other at that moment, any other instruction about it. I just it's like I understood it, right away, what
Mm-hmm.
it was on some level, and so I started doing it right away. And there were a couple of VHS tapes I bought where that had been recorded, like mostly for kids also, like all of these songs, and I learned them off the VHS tapes. And then because I moved to Espanola just in September of 2000, so it was, just not even 2 years after I started this practice, immediately I got involved with teaching and leading the kids in the celestial communication. And what was great about that too is that I had a real, consistency is the key with anything we learn, practice, teach. So I, every week for 7 years, led the kids in celestial communication. So I
Wow.
really had to learn them. And, at that time, I first was focused on mostly ones that existed. And I would practice every week with one of the two women that Yogi Bhajan really directed to create these. So every week I met with her to practice, and then I would lead it with the kids. And that was truly an incredible time. I think that's 7 years. And she doesn't teach public classes, but what happened was that her name's Siddhi Huddy, is that she would just relay information to me about it subtly or directly. She would just make a comment.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like it was an official class, but I would have this connection with her. And then when I would create them, she would also like do them with me and give me feedback on them, and like again kind of reflect back what was happening, like in her experience. And
Mm-hmm.
she also was this dancer and choreographer background, and had knew the mantras really well, and from all of her years of being a part of this. And she's also spent a lot of time with Yogi Bhajan, and was there at all the original classes where he introduced the concepts of celestial communication, which was in the 90s. It wasn't early on, it was a little later. And he said that it was really important actually for the times we're in now, because it's a stress reliever and allows us to get back in touch with our soul and our creativity, our original self. Um, so I learned so much through her. I also had these photocopied notes that were like notes taken from all the lectures he ever gave that described celestial communication,
Mm-hmm.
that I would read and study. And there was another woman, Huddy Kidden, who lived in LA. And whenever she came to town, we would all get together. We would create ones together, or we would practice together. And at
Wow.
every event, I mean, at every summer solstice, of course, but even other things, we would lead the whole community in them. So then I was leading the 1,000 people, with them, and
Mm-hmm.
even at Yogi Bhajan's funeral, and memorial. But we led celestial communication. I mean, it was like all the time, and there's this confidence that builds too. And this is why the children do it in front of the congregation as well, or in front of the community, is to build their confidence.
Mm.
And in all these years, I started creating more of my own too.
Yeah.
And just really for me, that was such a therapeutic practice. Um, I would create one when I felt down or had a challenge, and I would just have a song that spoke to me, and that when I listened to it made me feel better, like just really practically. And then I would
Yeah.
create it, and it would change something in me. And even though I was with children so much, I really felt called to teach adults. I felt like, also, if you've seen the ones I create, they
Mm-hmm.
are pretty sophisticated. Like, they're
Uh-huh.
not for children. Most of I mean, I can make them for children, but I really enjoy getting into the subtlety of it, or the power of it,
Yeah.
and teaching a little more complicated ones, although simple is actually beautiful and effective,
Yeah.
equally. So over the years, I just created more and more my own and started teaching it more and more, and teaching in teacher trainings and on its own. And I always knew I would do much more with it. I always felt that would happen and that it just wasn't the time. Like 18 years ago, I just knew it was going to be a bigger part of my life. But I didn't even worry about it. I just felt it
Yeah,
was,
it'll unfold.
yeah. And it's still unfolding. But now I am grateful I get to share it so much. There's something about it for me that, yeah, just awakens me and makes me feel so alive and creative and myself. And what I'm really passionate about teaching too, which I've really just started doing more, is teaching others how to create their own,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel something really magical happens. I mean, that's just the best word in healing. And it's so empowering, I think, because you create the therapy for yourself. And so I've started that, but that's what I'm going to be developing more and more, I think, in
That's
the future.
so I have two kind of follow-up celestial communication questions. And one is like, how would you explain celestial communication? Like, does someone who's not in a class and about to do it, and in that case, it's very clear what celestial communication is, but like, how do you describe what celestial communication is?
Thank you. Yes. So first of all, I think of it as being a part of mantra or nod yoga. It's a sound
Mm-hmm.
current. And so this is a little far out, but then I'm going to make it practical. So it's kirtan. It's, which you may know about, like, called kirtan, where you're like singing and playing instruments with the mantra and with the music. So it's that your body is doing that.
Mm.
And what kirtan does, which is what celestial communication is, I consider it's a form of kirtan, is that you are so fully engaged with the mantra or the sound current that your body, your mind, and your spirit all are together, all are one.
Mm.
And so with celestial communication, you're moving the upper body, the arms and the hands, and you're just stabilized in the lower body. And in this, it's like an expression of the sound through the body. It's an embodiment of the sound and mantra. So I think of it also, because I know people can think it's so ethereal, it's so out there, this word celestial, but
Mm-hmm.
really I find it's an embodied practice, and that it's a way to fully immerse in the sound current and receive such complete benefits from it. And it's also kirtan in the sense that it is a form of meditation, but kirtan meditation is like, it's more social, or like your eyes
Mm-hmm.
are open, or they can close too, but like it's more engaging with other people, even like you're relating to one another. um it's not just like a cave yogi meditation, I would
Yeah.
say. It's a different aspect of meditation. um
Yeah.
and I think it's also very accessible, because you don't really have to know anything. You don't have to know how to do asanas or have a lot of physical skill to do it. I find it's very relatable for anyone who enjoys moving.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question is, I think the idea of celestial communication, and most people when they start a practice would follow along, but I love your inspiration to guide people on making their own, because it's about, and this is the Aquarian age, like we're our own gurus, like connecting, like having our own direct connection to source and creativity. Um, but hearing you, like you have this huge dance background, and then the other woman was a choreographer. And so what would you say to people who are like, oh, I don't have any experience in that, so I can't come up with my own?
Oh, yes. Well, absolutely. Everyone can. A couple of things. One is that the movements can look however. So it's like, it is so creative. It can come from just within you, anything. Like, you don't even have to, doesn't have to be movements that you know from anywhere. It can be so unique. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
cool because it's not like dance in that sense. Um, in fact, so maybe someone who's a dancer with a lot of technical background might have to loosen up a bit, because it's not going to be like that. It's a little different. I would say, I guess one thing that I do focus on when I teach people and guide them into their own creation is I do help people to expand their movement vocabulary, is what I call it.
Mm.
Because I think that's the only thing I think I really have from my dance background, was just a lot of chance to improvise and explore movement. And if people haven't done a lot of that, you don't need to have had that background, but I do think it helps to free people up and give them the options, because they're just not used to it. But and also to help people get out of their head. That's what I
Yeah.
mostly do. Get people out of their head, into their bodies. But what is so cool is it really isn't a technique in that sense, and that I don't know. I definitely guide people through it, but I'm trying to think of what I can say now to help. It's just innate. It's just part of who we are, being human.
Mm-hmm.
It's we always use our bodies to express. We're always using, it's a body language. So if we can just think about it, like we are always making gestures, or maybe someone's done something athletic where there's movement, or something with art where there's a kind of movement, and it's that simple.
Yeah.
It's not something actually outside of oneself, but it may not have been yet identified in oneself.
That's beautifully said. And I think, like I said, I think most people would not, it would be hard to start by making up your own, but I just want to empower people. Like if you check out a video and you do some celestial communication and then you want to get creative and create your own, like there's such an empowerment and joy and grace and connectivity in that. And I just find it so funny because Kundalini yoga, the physical movements tend to be so prescribed and like do this exactly this way and lift your legs up at 30 degrees. And then there's celestial communication where it's like, do whatever you want. And so
Yeah.
I just find it such a fun part of the practice that, in my opinion, is underexplored and underpracticed because of the joy and the grace and the creativity and like the lack of rigidity that comes with it.
Mm.
So I'm so happy to share the teaching with our audience, and hopefully some people feel inspired to check it out. And so how can people, if they want to connect with you, learn more about you and what you do, how can they do that, or where can they do that?
Well, I invite you to come to my website, adarshkaur.com. And that's ADARSHKAUR.com. And there I have a newsletter list you can sign up for, where you're always can find like what I'm doing currently. And also you can connect with me on social media. My links are all on that webpage. Also, I'm online at a place called Soul Tribe Online, and I'm posting a lot of social communication videos there that aren't anywhere else. I wanted to create this whole like library because there's so many of them,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a subscription, but it's a low cost subscription, and I also lead 40-day sadhanas there in celestial communication, and I teach Kundalini yoga and meditation there as well. And I have also this new course that's going to be permanently online. If you want to really learn, I call it The Elements and Artistry of Celestial Communication. And it walks through like what it is in great detail, and also the beginnings of how to create your own. It doesn't go into a long workshop on that, but it gives you the beginnings of how to begin to feel free to do that, and to have kind of the foundation that you would need to do that as well.
That's awesome. And I'll put links to all of those things in the comments for this, or I'm sorry, in the description for this episode, and also on the page for this episode. So if anyone's listening, you can find the links there to connect with Adarsh and learn more about celestial communication. Anything else you want to say, Adarsh? Anything feel left unsaid?
I just really love the themes that I found in our conversation today of how empowering Kundalini yoga is, how much agency there is in it, how it awakens our own inner power, and how, just like you, I encourage people to create your own celestial communication. It really, like, even like Jen said, like just by watching a video, you don't even need anything else. If you want something else, I'm here. but it really is something that is the creativity and power within each person. So innately it's there. And I just love that this is the theme. It's been on my mind a lot lately, this need that I feel we have for agency, for self-authority and authenticity. And I really do feel like these are some of the best tools that I know, to support myself in that. And I feel like we're in these incredible times, and that I think we do have what we need to live them. And I think that whether it's this or something else you find, I just really encourage everyone to know that there are these practices, and there is something you can do that you can do so immediately, often, something in 10 minutes or less, to remember who you are and to remember your power. And that is my really greatest wish for everyone right now.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Adarsh. I will hopefully talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jen.
All right. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Adarsh. I will put links to everything she talked about in the episode description for this episode and on the website, the post for this episode, which you can find at heartcenteredrevolution.com/41. I'd also love your feedback on how you liked having an interview style episode. I do plan on doing them here and there in the future, just to kind of introduce you to some of the other people in the Kundalini yoga community. And then even people who aren't teachers, people who just, are kind of like normal, everyday people who incorporate Kundalini yoga into their life. Because there's all different paths to this practice, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to take teacher training to kind of commit to the practice or be a part of it. There are so many different paths, and I think it's important that we highlight and leave space for that. And there's also different seasons, right? Kundalini yoga can be a really big part of your life for a period of time, and then you can have some distance from it, and then it can come back. Like, all paths are correct. And so I just think it's so fun to hear people's stories about how they relate to their practice and kind of how their life has unfolded. Okay, we'll transition now into our pranayama for today. We're just going to do 3-part yogic breath. So go ahead and bring yourself into a comfortable position, sitting up nice and tall. Heart is lifted. Let's roll the shoulders up, back, and down. Lift the crown of the head so you feel nice and tall. Tuck your chin just slightly down and then back so you feel an opening in the back of the neck. Go ahead and closing your eyes, bringing your hands onto your knees or folded into your lap. And then just check in with your breath the way it is now, letting it be relaxed. Then all together on your next exhale, exhale completely all the breath out. And then as you inhale, slowly and gently fill up your abdomen. Feel your belly expand, giving yourself a nice big belly. And then as your belly fills up, breathe the air into your ribs, expanding your lungs. And then inhaling into your upper shoulders, upper chest. And then we're going to exhale the other way. Exhaling, your shoulders come down, ribs come together, belly back to navel. This is 3-part yogic breath. Inhaling belly, ribs, and chest. Exhaling, chest, ribs, and belly. Getting that complete exhale. Inhaling. It's like a wave rises up your body from your hips to the tops of your shoulders with expansion. And then as you exhale, there's contraction and release from your shoulders down to your hips. Long, long, slow, deep breaths through the nose. Eyes are closed, and you can choose to focus them at the third eye if you like. Particularly if your mind is overly active and chatty, focusing your eyes at something actually busies a big part of your brain, and so it helps to quiet the mind. As we take these conscious breaths, we're uniting mind, body, and spirit. It's one of the easiest ways to come into alignment, to shift your energy, to shift your mindset. Going at your own pace, let's take a couple more breaths like this. Inhaling belly, ribs, and chest. Exhaling chest, ribs, and belly. One more. Inhaling belly, ribs, and chest. Exhaling chest, ribs, and belly. Getting a complete exhale, moving at your own pace. Once you have your exhale, just relax your breath. Keep your eyes closed and connect with yourself. You might want to put your hands over your heart, maybe left hand over heart, right hand over left. Just check in with yourself, with your mental, emotional, and spiritual state. Not judging where you're at right now, just observing. Connecting with the part of you that is not these fluctuations. The part of you, your soul, your inner light, your inner being, that is constant. It's a constant source, a constant vibration of joy. And while our mental, emotional, and spiritual states may fluctuate, or experiences may fluctuate, this inner being is always at peace and joy. And oftentimes it takes just a few quick breaths, a few long, deep breaths, I should say, and just the intention to connect with this inner source of well-being. And when you're ready, you can blink open your eyes. Beautiful. Thank you for joining us for episode 41. Again, if you want any of the links that Adarsh talked about, it'll be at heartcenteredrevolution.com/41. And if you'd like to contribute or support to the podcast, then you can do so at heartcenteredrevolution.com/support. We love you. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Satnam.